Okay. Hello everyone, thank you for coming. Welcome to the 75th ZgPHP meetup. We are here at Fun Room in Q. Thanks to our hosts for hosting this meetup. First, I would like to announce two PHP conferences. If you are planning to go on any of them, consult with other people here, so it would be a good idea to maybe go with somebody else. We go together. So the first one is PHP Benelux, January 26th and 27th, and another one is PHP UK, happening on February 15th, so the day after Valentine's Day. So if you're crying a lot at home, you can cheer yourself up at the conference. My presenter is working, yeah. So our host today is Q Software. Some of you maybe know about this company. Those who don't know about anything about the company, for example, we have comments like, "Oh, you do PHP." So I'd like to call Harry to tell us something about Q. Please, one round of applause for our host.
So, welcome to Q. Hopefully to not just the first meetup. And yeah, I'm not going to take too much time. I was just going to say a few words about Q as a company. So currently Q has about 100 people, about 60 or 70 in development. We have offices in United States, United Kingdom, and Scandinavia. We're working in around 20 countries, and in the past year and a half, we managed to pull off about 100 projects, something like that. Our core technology is PHP. We have two basic modes of work: in-house, project-based, and dedicated teams in terms of Ruby, Python, .NET, Java. Usually we set up clients with developers in Croatia. As it was announced, currently we are in our fun room. We have internal workshops, and during the day we can, I don't know, play table tennis and drink some beer. That's it. I'm not gonna take any more time. So welcome once again, and after the presentations, we're gonna have a short tour of the office again. So if anyone didn't go through the building, feel free to do it.
Q provided us with beer, soda, and pizza. We'll come later, so don't go home. We can have dinner here. Ooh. We want you to submit your talk proposals. We want you to speak at ZgPHP. So if you have some great idea you want to share with us, please shoot us a mail, message, catch with me or Mira here later, and we can arrange something. We really want to hear something new, something cool, but also don't be afraid. If you think I'm not good enough for giving a talk, remember that I gave a talk, so everybody is good enough. Feel free to submit your idea, and we can work something from it. Okay. As you may know, we have this cool initiative, feedback initiative, but today our hostess will be Miro. Miro will be giving away some prizes with his cool stuff he created, especially for this opportunity. So, Miro.
Thank you, everyone. So I guess if you went to one of our previous meetups, we did it very analog with papers, and you would pull out them from a hat or whatever it was last time. So a friend of mine and I decided to, why don't we build a ref one? So this is just a stupid prototype that we decided to build in like a week and a half. And what are some of the prizes that you can get? Well, first one is Code Anywhere 1-year license. The other one is PHP Storm 1-year license. And the third one is a Shift conference ticket. So whoever wants to go to Split in June, this is a really good excuse. How you can win them, for those that don't know, leave feedback on Joined In, and we raffle the last few meetups, and you can earn them here. So you can even see that each comment you leave gives you a bigger chance to win because Goran is here twice. People are multiple times. So each comment gives you a bigger chance to win something. Probably on the next meetup or in January, we're increasing our sponsorship part. We're going to give away PHP Serbia tickets as well, something that a lot of people were really sad last year because they sold out like 2 months in advance, which is something that I'm gonna say is probably gonna happen again. So actually ZgPHP meetup might be the only place somewhere in March or April having a ticket. So let's start off and see if the person is here. And of course, the person that we choose can pick one of those free prizes. No, it's running on Heroku, and I'm gonna guess that Heroku decided to sleep a bit.
Just JavaScript.
No, there's no JavaScript. Actually, the whole app has no JavaScript. Tony! Which one do you want?
PHP start.
Mario, not here. Ah, 2 clicks. Another Mario, not here. I think he's already was picked a few times and okay, I should have prepared this part. Anna, not here. Bruno, not here. So as you see, it's not that hard to win. Tom, no. Which one do you want?
I already won this turn, so I'll skip.
No, please take something.
Goran here?
I'll take all anyway.
Thank you. Just grab me so I can so we can exchange details. And the last one's gonna be Josip. Not here. That's it.
I'm done.
So first talk is gonna be about what's the first talk gonna be about? Swagger. Okay, so people did listen, and you ready?
Yeah.
So let's give a warm applause to Ante.
Okay, I'm gonna do this fast because there's not too much time, and Swagger is huge. So documenting APIs with Swagger, or how to be lazy and create solid documentation for your Symfony 3 app in order to avoid talking to other developers, because nobody really likes that. For me, the problem was I would make an API, and then 5 developers come to me and, dude, how do you update these fields? Which is the endpoint for this? How do you do that? So then I got tired of talking to 50 people per month about all the same things. So I started thinking about documentation, which I don't know nobody likes, but it's actually a good thing. So first about me, PHPing since 5.3, so 8 years. I love Symfony, of course, and wish I started working with it sooner. You can follow me on Twitter or see my GitHub there, and my current job role is senior developer and team lead at Q. Next. So, what's the idea? Basically, you want to document your APIs. Nobody likes things that you cannot find anything about on the internet. You want to test them, and you want to be lazy, because once you start copy-pasting, that's really bad. And if you want to fix things that are copy-pasted 10 times, you're going to have a bad time, right? And also dry. probably everyone knows, do not repeat yourself. And also, as I said, avoid things like, oh my God, we just replaced 5 of our developers on project, and we got 5 new ones, and now you have to brief all of them from the beginning and teach them how to use their API, how to authenticate, and so on. And of course, we love standards. Standards are the best. Everyone wants to hug and kiss them all the time. So, what's Swagger, Open API, and all that stuff? Well, we're going to talk mostly about Swagger, but we should mention Open API, which is basically a description format for REST APIs. And basically, that's all the stuff that you need to describe a regular by-the-book API, where you want to see some endpoints, some payloads that you need to send, some parameters, and so on. And OpenAPI uses either JSON or YAML, which we've all used before, probably. Then we have Swagger. It's a set of open source tools for OpenAPI that basically help you to build your documentation. So consider it like building blocks for your documentation for your API. And it's consisted of 3 parts. Swagger Editor, where you write the specs. Swagger UI, where you see what you've just written and use it. And Swagger Codegen, where you generate some CRUDs, mostly basic stuff, and then you need to work hard on them, but let's not talk about Codegen now. So you need Swagger Editor to write the specs, which you then need to use the Swagger UI to see those specs in action. Or basically, once you have your Swagger JSON file, you can load the Swagger UI and see all the nice things that it provides. For example, I've prepared some stuff, and here is Swagger UI in all its glory. And here you can see that we have, I called it an example bundle for Symfony. It has 2 entities, author and book. And basically, my database, I think it's empty now. So here you can test, see all your documentation. You can try it out, run executes, see the results here, and so on. But we'll get to that soon. Okay. So what next? So you already, well, most of you probably know API foo. Where do you begin? Or how do you Swagger your stuff? I'll just assume the following, that you used Symfony before. And basically, you can use any framework, but I use Symfony to show some examples. If you use any framework like Zen, Laravel, or any other stuff, it probably has something like these Symfony bundles that I use. So you can get like a nice jump start from this tutorial. Let's presume you already have your API, it's working, but you haven't actually documented anything. You did follow some REST practices, the best practices, I mean. So you didn't write stupid URLs that nobody would guess, or when you have a user entity, you don't want to call your endpoint profile, you want users. And also basic knowledge of annotations. So if you ever use Doctrine, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. Let's start. First step in configuring Swagger to work with your Symfony app is Composer. So basically with Symfony, you always just require some packages from packages. And here you can see that I've added the dev switch because we're developing and we don't want to really expose our Swagger UI or documentation on production environment. You always want to keep your Swagger on dev or test environment. And the last note is pretty cool, but it hasn't actually been made yet. How many of you heard of Symfony Flex? Okay, cool. So Symfony Flex, Fabian, who wrote Symfony and is behind Sensio Labs, he wrote Flex, which basically allows you to use something that he called recipes. And then if you have the newest Symfony 3.3, 3.4, and 4, which is still in beta, you can use Flex or test it. And then you would just like type composer rec swagger, and it would automatically do all the steps that I'm about to show you. So Flex is something like auto-configured composer bundles, something like that. And I've had a workshop here in Q about Flex, and I might even share my GitHub repository about it so you can check it out. And even in beta, Flex works good because we haven't had any problems with it yet. So step 2, after the composer stuff, you add the bundles to the kernel. So basically the 2 green lines down. Of course, you can see that I've greenified the dev and test environments to make sure you don't install Swagger on your production. And the last step, we need to configure the 2 bundles that we're going to use. First bundle is Swagger bundle. Left side config. I'm not going to go into too much details, but most of it is self-explanatory. The most important things are base path, where you select a prefix for your API. Schemes, which allows you to use your API on HTTP or HTTPS. And annotation on the bottom, where you select bundles that actually have any Swagger documentation in them. So, for example, in my code, it would look something like this. So this is my example Symfony app, and you can see here that I have an example bundle, which has a Swagger folder, and this folder has some models in it. So basically, when you configure your app with this, this basically tells the timing Swagger bundle to use all the Swagger models in this bundle. You can add 10 or 15 of them, and you can have all your bundles documented in this way. So what this does is the bundle goes through all your Swagger files and creates a huge Swagger JSON file, as you can see up in the top, which is basically a full configuration of your bundle. And then the something Swagger UI bundle uses this file to render a nice, beautiful UI, so you can see all the docs and test them. And on routing dev, you basically add the 2 URLs. First one is where your Swagger JSON file will be generated. These are some routing routes that the UI bundle uses to pick up the JSON file. And the one on the bottom is for the UI, where you basically just select the prefix for your API that you can see here. So I have my localhost URL, and it's on docs. Once I open it, it shows my bundle. I can put anything here, like Johnny or something like that, and it will work. Okay, next step. So config's done. Let's get to some documentation. I'll be demoing on our example bundle app. You can get it on my GitHub. It should be on QLion's GitHub, but I didn't have the credentials, so it's here now. We are using 2 bundles. As you've seen, we have author and book. I won't be going through all of them because it's a huge amount of time, so just skip on some most important parts, but you mostly get the point. Basically, two entities with a relation. Author can write some books, and each book has an author that wrote it. All the files for the documentation will be in our bundle. With the folder I've shown, Swagger models directory. So, next. So I'm going to create an author. So basically, the first thing you need is to model a request and a response. That's the endpoint, post on API/authors, and you want to just create a fresh author. So first thing you need is a request. How does the request look like? It has no ID and all the fields in the entity. So for example, an author has first name, last name, some biography, date of birth, I don't know, the generic stuff. And you want to model the request to show people what they need to post in the body of their request to your endpoint. And the second thing is response JSON. So once they post it and everything is fine and it goes through some validation and all that stuff, sanity checking and whatever, the API will insert the author in the database and return you a nice JSON response with basically all the fields you've posted with an ID. You can have an ID like integer or ID UUID, nobody cares. So let's show some Swagger annotations. Yeah, I mentioned that Swagger files are basically building blocks, and the Swagger bundle goes through all your PHP Swagger files and builds a huge JSON. So let's show a file. So this is author request create. As you see, we have one bundle that's called an example bundle, and we've added all the files to Swagger models, author. So every request and response for author and any helpers that we might have will be in this folder. So naming scheme is entity name, author. Then what is it? It's a request. And create, it means it's a create author request. The definition, as shown on screen, is prefixed. So we have monkey SWG definition, and it says that definition of this request is called example author request create, because remember we're in the example bundle, and this request will contain all of, and then example author base. You can see the first schema reference, and second is example. Second is another property called biography, because example author base is just some base fields, and biography is a huge text file with tons of text, which you don't really need in the base file. I'll get to this a bit later. We also select which fields are required, which then in Swagger UI looks like this. So this is the thing that I want to post, and if I select try it out, I can edit this. First name, let's call it Billy Bob. And we'll say he's a female, just for fun. And he was not okay. So let's try it out. Execute. And then, lo and behold, we got our response body. So this part. We got Billy Bob, he has ID 2. And that's basically it. We got the biography back because, as I mentioned, we have a base user, base author, and then a biography on the side, as I would say. So this is author base. I hope everybody can see it. Basically, this definition says, okay, here are the properties of the example author base. So those are the most common ones. We've added biography because sometimes, or let's say on listing, you don't want really the listing of 50 authors to contain biographies of each one of them. So on listings, you would basically say that author listing will contain only the base data, no biography. Let's go back to this is the base. Common across most requests and responses. Basically, 90% of stuff will be 90% of the stuff will be outputted as common. The good thing here is you can reuse it and merge with all other properties. So, for example, if you have some, let's say the author has books, and you will want to get a single author and serialize some books in the response. You will just add the books. You don't need to have them in the base entity because it's all building blocks. Basically, add or merge them or remove them or anything. And the thing that gives us power to do that is the serializer, which I've also configured and used in this project. So It's not really on topic here, but you can check it out for yourself. Okay. Also, we have author response light. We'll get to that later. This is the response for the author once you create it. So first we've made one, and then we need to get it back with an ID. So this is definition. For example, author response default, and this definition contains all of helper ID, which this is the ID that we need, but we didn't include it in base because it's not common in all requests. Then we have example author base, all the base fields. And the next one is biography, which we added as a special additional property. So what the key all of does is it merges all the schemas that we give it. So you can build it like Legos, and it will always contain, always render on the UI the properties that you've merged together. And the last property is called just name. So it's not first name, it's not last name, it's name. And I've also given an example in the entity. It's a virtual property. It's not really saved to the database. It's just so you don't have to concatenate first name and last name all the time. But you can check it out in the code later how it's done in the serializer. So we've created an author, got a response. So what's the helper ID? Well, basically helper ID is just an ID property. And you use it on every GET request for any entity or any listing request for any entity. So I've just extracted it without any namespace on authors or books. It's just in models, like a helper. So, I mean, you always need ID or UUID, but you don't need it for create requests. And this just gives us some flexibility to use. Okay, so we've created an author. What about controller annotations? Like any MVC framework, Symfony has a bunch of controllers where you define your API endpoints. So that's exactly what we have in our example bundle. This is the create action for author. It's in author controller, of course. And the annotations we've added above the create action is like usually you put method get or method post in this case, and URL or what's it called, root, and then you set the root. So this is exactly what we have in Swagger annotations too. So SVG post says it's a post request. You have path is /authors, but with a prefix, which is /API. Tags is just a tag name to group all the similar requests for the same entity. Summary is basically just a description. You can see all that here. I have this down. Create a new author. An example author is basically tags group. And all the author things are tagged with the same group, so you have them nicely coupled together. So the rest of the controller annotations is as follows. First parameter is the body. You can see name body, in body, which basically means you post and add a JSON body in your post request, which needs to look, it's required, and needs to look like example author request create. You already defined that, so now we know how it looks. So if you follow all the guidelines or just reuse the example thing, it's all defined here. So once you post, you get an example. And I've filled it up with real data, so you can actually just click try and execute, and it will add the new author. And the next thing, so we have the parameter covered. Next is response. That basically says what responses can we get. We can get 200, okay, that's what we want. Description is author created, and response will be according to the schema given, which is example author response default. But you can also get some validation errors. So if, for example, I put I'm trying it out, and I'll put gender orc and submit. Whoa, I got 422 unprocessable entity. So you can see that we got a different response, which says validation failed, code 422. And what are the problems, validation problems? We got gender, says please enter a valid gender. And this is all described in the bottom part. So response 422 will be modeled as schema validation error. This file is on the next page. So this is validation error. It's basically, you got a code in your JSON body. Because it's an error, we got to put some code 422. You have a message which says unprocessable entity. You can put something more verbose, but this is enough. And you have a new property called validation, which is basically just an array of field key values. So if you got a validation error on gender, you will get key gender and the error message for gender. Please enter a valid gender, which you can see in the body below. Also, we got some debug stuff, but I won't go into that. So let's check out the indexing of authors. This is the response. Because it's a GET request, you don't need anybody to send. You don't have a request Swagger documentation for it, just a response. So on our index section on author controller, you can see that we got an SVG get on path authors. It will list all authors, and you get a response that is type array, which means it will basically return you an array of example author response light. And I mentioned here that we use light because we skip biography. We don't want it. So I could have just used base, it would be the same thing. So if you use serialization groups together with Swagger and modularize your documentation files, you can basically get a really nice flexible API and the documentation for it. For example, we could have index authors superlight, and then if I have a definition called example author response superlight, which would only contain ID, first name, and last name, I would get a response which would be just 3 fields. And the list of authors would be with only 3 fields each. Sometimes you just want listing without any mumbo jumbo that doesn't come with it. What else? Oh, you can see that we don't have any errors here because basically, unless you get a 404, which says that this /authors root doesn't exist, there's not an error you can get other than 500, which basically means your app is screwed and you made a different mistake. Even if we don't have any authors in the database, you will still get an empty JSON response, so that's okay. Get a single authors. Okay, so this is where things get a bit more interesting. Once you get a single author, of course, you want all the details that come with it. So you want the biography, you want first name, last name, date of birth, city, whatever, and you want all his books. So on the get action, we have SVG get, path is authors /ID, and you need to provide a valid ID, or you get a 404, of course, and you get a single author. Of course, you can't really get him without the ID, so we have a required parameter called ID. And in the response section, you can see that 200 will return you basically single author, but definition is called example author response default books. This means that you will get something like this. So I'll get my author ID 1, and we get this stuff. So this is John Doe. He has ID 1, and I've got all the properties including ID, biography, which in this case is short, but it will usually be a lot bigger. But we want it, since that's a single fetch, and you can allow yourself to get some more data in a single fetch. You're not getting 50 of them, you're getting one. And also under books, because author has a relation to his books, we're getting all his books serialized. So for example, here we only have one book, but if I go down to books and just create a new book, so it's called Lord of the Cars, let's say. In the soft cover, ages 666, and we say author ID is 1. So that would be John Doe. And if I execute, and get a nice response, here I can see that I've made a new book called Lord of the Cars, ID 2. Author is John Doe, and our API already picked him up from the database and serialized him on the book. So now if I go up to authors and get John Doe again, whoa, John Doe has 2 books now. Magic. And let's go back to the code. You can see this here. Just a second. Author default books. So I hope everybody can see it, but definition says that we get example author response default, which is default response for author, which includes the ID, biography, and we've added schema with property books, which is type array. If you have a book which only has one author, this won't be array, it will be property. So we'll have, let me show it. This is the book definition, which says example book response default with author. And you have here helper ID, example book response default, and under third row, under all of third row is property author, and it's not array. It's a property. It's not an array. It's a property. So if you fetch a book, you will not get an array of authors. You will get just one, and he will be serialized with this. You'll get just a default author with his biography, but you won't get his books. So don't have a circular reference. Yeah, thank you. So back to this. So this is our cheat sheet workflow. How do we actually not make a mistake while modeling all that stuff? Number one, you model the request. So basically, first thing you need, what do I need to send in a post or put, or nothing if it's a get, to actually make a request that's a valid request. So here you basically just model the endpoints and the methods for get request, and endpoints, methods, and body for put or post. Second, you model the response. So once you make a request, you want to know what response are you going to get. So the best way to show you is here, even if I didn't post anything, I can see what I need to post here. Downstairs, I have all the responses. 200 OK will be with this body, not the same data, but structured like this. And 422 will be with this body. Okay, so once you model the response, you model the controller action. So this is where you put, is it put, post, get, or delete, or patch, or whatever you want. You define all the HTTP codes for each response. So basically, if you have a get request, you only need, I don't know, 200 OK, because 404 you will only get on getting single item if it doesn't exist, and on listings you don't need 404. Response body for each possible response. We've already been through this. And oh yeah, are there required parameters? You can add them as well. So required parameters can be authentication token. So if you have some, I don't know, OAuth2 in front of your API, you need to authenticate. You add a parameter that calls for authentication, where you say, okay, property name is, I don't know, token, and it needs to be string. And you will get a new field where you can paste this string, which you get when you log in over the API. And unless you paste the correct token, you won't be able to access it. You will get access denied error. Like it's 403. Yeah. So that's one parameter, auth token. Then you need entity ID. So if you're getting a single item, you need ID. If you're putting or updating one, you again need an ID. And of course, I don't know, if you have /authors/search, you can post some parameters like search by first name, then you put first name equals something. And this all can be defined in Swagger, so you can use it. Basically, if you define all these fields, you can just open your Swagger UI, enter the parameters in input fields, click try it out or execute, I don't know, and it should work as expected. This cheat sheet, let's call it, we use it so once, if you're making an API, whenever, I don't know, a new developer comes to a project, we basically give them this, well, not this, but something that we have internal. But the process is the same. If you make a new API endpoint, you need to go through all these things. This way, you don't screw up. You don't want to screw up. So, conclusion. Swagger your APIs. It's cool. Profit. Questions?
Sorry, for Swagger models, what's the advantage of using annotation only PHP files? Can you use something?
You can use YAML, whatever you like. I just use annotations because we always use annotations, so it's okay. I know Miro will probably kill me. He likes XML for everything. So
No.
you can use YAML or annotations, and I think that's the only two things you can actually use.
How much of this is auto-generated? Is it
Well, I
nothing?
mean, the UI of
No, the annotations.
none.
None? Is
No.
it, do they relate to the real model? Yeah.
Let's.
So what if you like change a big chunk of stuff mid-project? Do you need to like go and rewrite? And
Yeah, but
is there a way to auto-generate from models?
I would like to know if there is one. For now, I have no idea if you can auto-generate it. But the reason we made so many files for basically a simple API is that you can use all that stuff. So if you chunk them down to smaller bits, smaller Legos, then you can create bigger Legos with a bunch of smaller ones. But if you have one huge Lego, then you need to throw it away and make a new one once you change your model or something like that. So, for example, if I want to just add one field, let's call it something that's base for every author that you want in every request or on every response, I would just add one field to my author. Okay, so this is my author. Let's say I want to add a new field called mid-name. Just add it here, annotate it with the stuff. You don't need everything, but I've added it so we have a nice example or a nice cheat sheet for new developers. I would add, I don't know, mid-name, and then put a serialized name would be mid-name. Groups would be default because you always want the mid-name. And also light because you always want it in listings, for example. And okay, author default is something specific. That's it. You can leave it blank if author doesn't have a mid-name. And then when you add it to your Swagger annotations, you just go to author base and add it here. So basically, do this and add a mid-name. Okay, if I save, I go to my Swagger UI. Reload. Then go under create new author. It should be here. So we have midnight Plonker.
But you still have to do it manually.
Well, I hope someday we won't, but yeah, shoot.
What would happen if you haven't had the annotation in the Swagger file? Something break, something wrong with it, you're missing something?
Probably not, because well, maybe it would if it's a required field in your model. So if you would need to create a new author, but you forgot to post 3 fields that are actually required, it would naturally explode. But it wouldn't explode with the doctrine doctrine error. For example, we use doctrine here. It wouldn't explode with the doctrine error if you put some asserts, like I have here in my model.
So I'm thinking about the talks. So basically, if I add a new field or change something, and I don't update the documentation, that's something that will happen eventually.
Yeah.
So is there a way to maybe test documentation, build it against your?
Oh, to like validate it over your models. So
Yeah.
not that I know.
If you could validate it, then you can probably auto-generate it.
The way you can validate. Okay.
Sorry, they don't add the midnight doctrine.
No,
So what's gonna happen if you execute?
nothing. Doctrine doesn't expect this field, and it will just be ignored.
But shouldn't it be in response?
Uh,
Isn't Swagger going to say, well,
Yeah,
those will be
but it will be
there's an
empty.
error?
It will be empty because I haven't modified my model to actually save this field. So it will probably throw an error when it tries to deserialize the JSON to the doctrine entity, because it will deserialize JSON and say, okay, this field doesn't exist. Next, you go.
But if there's no magic, let's say, when you add things, what's the advantage of all these custom formats and annotations versus the normal Swagger.json file with specification?
Well, we tried one project where we made a huge JSON file manually, basically built the whole thing manually, and it backfired because it was a pain in the ass to maintain. It was just huge. So
Okay, well, you can split the file as well. You can
Yeah.
reference the external file, which can be JSON schema.
Mhm.
Then you can, functional tests, test the response with the same JSON schema that you include in the specification.
yeah,
This is
that
something that I did in one project that works quite nicely. Plus, this bundle is using the old Swagger specification, right, 2.0.
yeah,
And the recent one is 3.0, which has much better structure and
UI.
components. Not the UI, the specification itself.
Okay.
3.0 has some things that work quite better, like different stuff with responses. They define components, so you actually can define all the chunks that you define here as the models. You can define this under components and just include them in the specification. So instead of specifying everything here in model, you can have one JSON file where you actually include everything. It doesn't have to be JSON; it can be YAML as well.
Okay, I haven't tested that, but is that what the latest API platform uses, if you know?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
since 3 months ago. So.
Yeah, we're thinking about switching to API platform, but it's a bit learning curve. Not the simplest, so.
Yeah, there is some software that can migrate to the documentation. I just did this 2 weeks
So
ago.
this is manual Swagger, yeah? If you use API platform, has anybody heard of it? Okay, just a few people. Basically, API platform allows you to just create this model. You just create an author, minimum annotations, or just use XML, whatever, and you add one annotation on top of your model here. Here. Basically, if you do this, so if I just do this and have API platform installed, it will automatically create the whole documentation for me with all the endpoints for your CRUDs. Well, basically the same ones that you just seen here. So that's one annotation. Of course, the documentation itself won't have all this stuff filled in like this, because this was done manually, and I think it's a lot more work, but it's actually better for your mobile or front-end developers who actually use this API to have John Doe instead of string in all the string fields. So for example, if I would use API platform to model my author, all the fields here that are string would be string. Yeah, that's cool because it does all the work of modeling the Swagger docs for you. But then again, it's not so cool because, well, learning curve and the documentation is not that precise.
It's the learning curve for the syntax that you write in your modeling. It's much more complex than the regular specification.
Well, it has to disagree because I've learned it in 2 days and wrote. I'm not sure if I can show.
You open the Swagger JSON file generated.
We wrote some huge APIs. Okay, now it doesn't work. Good. Basically, we wrote APIs with 140 endpoints and used this. And basically, on one endpoint, it adds you about 10 to 15 minutes of overhead. So, yeah, it's not. Once you multiply it with 120 or something endpoints, it's a huge amount of time. But then again, it's a lot better than not having the documentation.
But you have to write a model that's the same amount of work, right? It's just different syntax.
Yeah.
And in the end, you depend on one bundle that might not update in the future, and then you lock yourself in.
Yeah, but that's up to developers to continue using the updated bundles because I think there's a newer version of it. We've just been using this one. It was the fastest to set up a demo. So that's why I use it. I mean, it shouldn't be hard to migrate to Swagger 3.0 or get the latest bundles. I don't know. I didn't actually do the research for the latest versions. Just picked up the one we had working already.
Okay, that's it. We're out of time. We're going to have a 5-minute break. Whoever wants to grab a cigarette or something. So about
Pretty nice.
Right audience.
Okay, please take your seats. Let's continue with our meeting. Next is Marian Schufa with his topic Enums and PHP. Marian.
Hello, welcome. As Luca said, this will be about Enums and PHP. I just figured I haven't put it about which page. So about me, my name is Marian. I work in Tricoder. I like challenges, clean code, and that's one reason why I'm here, because I'd like to show you something, and later perhaps if we achieve some communication about it. Everything I showed here today, it's not this is the right way and everything else is wrong. It's more of steps that we take in order to have, let's say, some better enumerations in PHP. And I'd really like to see how you use enums and discuss with you. So let's start with it. So enumeration, or short enum. They are a collection of elements. There's actually various definitions. What enumeration are? They are more computer science, more mathematical. We'll stay with just collection of elements, sometimes called numbers. They can be ordered, but they don't have to be. Depends on the implementation, and that's the whole reason why enums are, let's say, invented. You'd like to define your own types that can have a certain set of values, but you'd like to not care about how they are represented internally. For example, in C, you have enums that you use as symbolic constants, but are actually represented as integers. In Java, they are objects, so you can check whether they are equal. They are identical if they share the same memory address and so on. And so this is the main reason why I'd like to talk about enumerations, because they define a new type, which means that in the languages, unlike PHP that have real native PHP enum support, you can define a new type and you can declare variables with that type, which means that you will be guarded by the compiler, or as you will see in our case, by the engine PHP interpreter, guarded that you try to assign a wrong value or pass a wrong value to your methods and so on. So we take baby steps. First thing that we do, usually use constants to represent our enumeration. So every prefix similar constants with same prefix, for example, here gender, here status, and we define some values. So there's nothing wrong with it, but it's error prone, and we will see later why. One main reason is that we inherit data type that the constant is holding. For example, here are integers. So only way that we can type hint our variables later is say integer, which means it can take any value from valid integer space. And we have to perform manual checks whether the past value is correct or not. But there is something, let's say, much worse, that some items share same representation but belong to different enumerations. For example, gender male and gender inactive are both zeros. Gender female and status active are both ones. So you cannot make a distinction when you receive one, whether it's a female, whether it's active, or just someone passed one. So those are kinds of bugs that can occur in your code. Because what this means that the enum value, actually enum member is the constant value itself. So it's 0, it's 1, you just reference it with the symbolic name. So let's see one simple example where we have our interface with that is user factory, has a method create that receives string email, receives gender and status, that are both integers. And later we in our factory call create email and provide additional, provide the constants that we need. So if you pay close attention, you will see that this is gender status and this is status gender. But CI will not warn us that something like this has happened. Our test will pass, and then later perhaps do some merge conflict or something else. What will happen is that we will have a silent that will have a silent alarm, actually not a silent alarm, huge alarm that everything has blown up because these two are swapped and there were no checks or guards whether we were not able to see whether someone actually decided to pass something that's a status active or someone provided an arbitrary number. Also, consider that there's an implementation create that doesn't reference any of these. How hard would it be for you to know that these are enums? Could you locate them? Could you see where the valid options are defined? So other issue with, it cannot be avoided if you're disciplined enough, but it helps if your types are, for example, type integers, provide little or no context to your code and what each of those values means. You will have, let's say, hard time onboarding people on your project because code that does not explain itself very well. So, as I said, constant values are enum elements. That's why we are unable to, when we receive an element, check whether it was element that we wanted to have, whether it's the valid type, because we didn't ever define type. We only use integers or strings in other ways. So we inherit constant data type, and the interpreter can't help us. So basically, since we are left on our own, since PHP does not have a native enum support, we could provide it. The only way that we can provide our own new types is using new classes. And basically, that's what we'd like to have. We would like, instead of using integers, we would like to provide some type that can have only certain set of values. In PHP, we can't do that. We can emulate values only, which we'll see. But it's one step closer to having, let's say, real-life experience with enums in PHP. So enum says types, what happens? We can have a much better static analysis of the code because now if we bug that we had on our previous slides wouldn't have happened because even when, as we develop PHP Storm would alert us, okay, you tried to pass type user gender and I was expecting status. We delegate certain checks to the PHP, which means we don't have to have inside of our methods, is this a valid element of one of those constants or something else? That will PHP take care of us. And code can be much more self-documented because now you can go to declaration and see where those values are defined, what are valid values, and etc. So one first step that we can take is something called simple SPL enum, which is actually not a part of the standard PHP library, just a pencil extension that provides various types as objects in PHP. But it's somewhat native support because, as we'll see later in the example, you can compare integers with objects and it will yield whether true or false depending on what wants to use. It allows us type hinting, that is first step into achieving our, let's say, heavenly enums. But it's not so easy to use because, as I mentioned earlier, idea of enum is to hide internal representation. You just use them as they are, and PHP engine itself will actually, PHP had enums. The compiler itself will, during the runtime, assign you some value and use that value to compare them. In our case, we don't have that much liberty, so we are stuck with using PHP objects, their references. Either we can use equality or identity operator. And this is the issue of simple enum, that we cannot use identity operator because it's so easy. Actually, it's encouraged when you want to create a new enum element instance that you manually create new enum element instance, which means that you can have multiple element instances in your system that represent same element, but actually cannot be checked the same element because their memory addresses are different. Next, my major thing is that they are not supported in PHP 7. They are only supported in PHP 5. So if you want to use that in PHP 7, you can't. But let's see some usage for those who still want to use SPLM. So the idea is that you define a class that extends SPLM. They have this notion of default constant that if you construct your enum without argument, the default will be used. You define this constant as no, yes, assigning some value. It can be arbitrary because you only use that value to construct your object itself. So you can type hint, for example, say yes, no, and if you try to provide, for example, std class or some other object instance, you will never get into this function because PHP will guard you against that. So also what we can do is if we want to check if two enum elements are the same, using SPLenum, we could compare this new yes, no, just with the constant because it's a native PHP extension in a sense, it's an extension written in C, which means that they can override some internal stuff in PHP and provide you ability to compare, for example, yes, no, double colon, no, with the instance. And it will yield true or false whether the enums are equal or not. But as I said earlier, everything here is good and everything here can also be better. It depends how much effort will you put into making your code, let's say, readable and smooth. So next step is, as you mentioned earlier, the main problem that we have is we have to manually create elements. So there can be many elements of the same instances of the same element. So somehow naturally, the next step would be to have a library that takes on itself creation of the elements and provides to us multiple singleton elements where there can only be one instance of object that represents one single element of an enum. And since they will always be on a different memory space, we can be sure that there can never happen that two different elements of the different enums share the same number. For example, in our earlier case that we discussed with the constants, if every single constant had a different integer value, then we wouldn't have the problem because only certain set of integers would be assigned to one enumeration, and so we could check if it's not within the valid range, then it is not a valid enum element that we expect. So Eloquent/enumeration is one such library that is actually quite a lot easier to use than SPLenum. Doesn't suffer from all that. You have to manually create your own instances, etc. So we are one step closer to one object instance per element, although it's still not, let's say, excellent. It allows some custom method implementation, which similar as we could do in SPLenum, because if you define your enums as classes, you can implement various methods that will be exposed later on as you use them through the code. For example, yes, no could have, short name method, which you could later on use, which may or may not be the good case depending on your domain, but sometimes they can be useful. One simple example is, I know if you ever looked about Java enums, but one thing that they've shown there is you have enumeration of planets, and each planet can return its own gravity and I think something else. So that may be something that you would like to do with your enums, and that's something that's a lot easier to do with Eloquent enumeration than with SPLM. So let's see one example. What we do here is we create final class yes, no. That's their way of guarding against too many instances, because they try to restrict you to create instances only within abstract enumeration. And if the class is final, you cannot extend it. You have a hard time overriding any of the stuff. And every library mentioned here has an idea of making use of it wrongly as hard as possible for you to think, okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong. So if you, for example, here would like to create a new instance outside somewhere and someone uses, I don't know, reflection to create a new object, when you're reviewing somebody's code, that will be a lamp that will say, okay, perhaps there is a better way, perhaps this will cause a bug somewhere later on. And we can also type hint it with yes, no, and or yes. Difference is here that we don't create our elements manually, but the library does it for us. Because here we just say yes, no, double colon, and use a magic method, yes, that corresponds to the constant name, and we will get the same element. Whenever we call this method, we will get the same element. So if we use this method throughout the code, we are, let's say, guaranteed that we can use identity check. So there are cases when it doesn't work. For example, they don't implement serializable interface. So if you do that, write your own methods, you can make your code behave unexpectedly because you can have multiple instances of the same element in your code. But as I said earlier, this is more about making our life easier. So if we try to make our own lives easier, we will not do any nested things. So as I mentioned earlier, for example, we can have our custom methods. I'll have to scroll here. So now we extend abstract multitone, which is a way of us defining our own elements within initialized members. When we just say new static y and yes, and new static n and no. How does this work? It's the library's internals. I will not go through that here, but the idea is if you try to create these objects outside of the context of these initialized members, you will receive an early error that will not stay silent until some real error occurs, but you will immediately know that you tried to do something that was not supposed to be done. Because I said earlier, these are all emulations. And whatever we try to do in the user lane to restrict you from wrong behavior, you can do exactly the opposite and negate our intention to help you. So we define our method, our property, we define our method construct, and we can also provide our own arguments. Oops. And down there we can define our own method symbol, which means that if we later on somewhere reference yes, no, double colon, yes, we can call a method symbol on that object and we will get y. And that's basically it for the eloquent. Now there is another approach. I'm shamelessly marketing my own library. Basically, I was not happy with the eloquent. I wanted a different approach that's more Java-like. So instead of oriented towards final class, I oriented towards abstract classes, because that way I still can reject someone from constructing that exact class, but I allow possibility of others to extend that class using anonymous classes, which we will see later on. So it has similar features as eloquent enumeration, but it also offers full polymorphic behavior. Eloquent uses final classes, I use abstract classes, which means that I can define abstract methods and implement them later on, which has its own, can find its own good place also in the example a bit later on. So here we define abstract class, yes, no, that extends enu. Method is called enumerate, but this is the simplest way, where it should be let the library create its own yes and no instances for us. Don't be scared, internally this uses eval, but it's controlled environment, and eval is not bad if used correctly. So basically the main usage is still the same, because we cannot create dynamic anonymous, dynamic static properties, but we can create dynamic static methods. So we have to use this method invocation. This library also has a way of trying to restrict you from having multiple instances, and currently the only way to have multiple instances of the same element is to use reflection class, because serialization is disabled, wake up, sleep, all of them just through exception. And the library will for you check that also this is called from the context that is valid from the within enumerate method. Everything else will throw exception. So yes, we can also use the type hinting. But I mentioned polymorphic behavior, and let's say that we want to have something like yes. Let's say we have an enumeration, and we'd like for our method to be able to return the opposite value. That is also instance that is member of the same enumeration. Well, following our rule of one instance of element per whole system, we will sooner or later have a cyclic loop. We will have a loop, we'll have an issue because at some point we'll have to construct an element that requires an element that should have been constructed, but it's not. For example, in our example, let's see. So we have no, we have yes. If we would like to use a custom method that in its constructor as argument receives the opposite element, that means that we would have to construct the opposite, we would have to construct yes for no, but in order to construct no, we need to have yes. And that's something that we can avoid using the abstract methods, where we, in our enum, define an abstract method, for example, called opposite. And then within each enum element, we implement the method that should be returned. One cool thing that you can do, enums are unit testable, this one at least, so you can also test various things. And this is resolved during the runtime when all of the elements are created, because they're created in a control environment within enum, so it's safe to use them here. Then you can see we can just use yes, no, opposite, and done the idea. So enums are not replacement for constants. Constants are symbolic name for a certain value. And enum is a collection of elements. What that means is the following. If we go back to the example where we had our users with gender and similar, if you care about the value, actually if you don't care about the value, you only care that within the same group there are distinct values, then I'd say there's a strong chance that they are enums. If you care about the value in a sense that if that value, if it were anything different, we would have an issue, for example, gravitational constant and similar. Those are constants. Constants are just a symbolic name for a certain value that we would like to give it some meaning and not have it as a magic number. Enums, they are our own types. They are something that we create, that we give meaning to. We define enums. Nobody can say that within yes, no cannot be maybe. If we define maybe, then it's valid choice. But the idea is that by using enums as objects instead of numbers, we get our code, I would like to say, much more self-explanatory and error-prone. And as I said, yeah, these are just, my intention was never to give you a full brief of the libraries, but to show different aspects of constants and enums. And now I'd like to know, what do you think about enums and constants and similar? How do you use them? Would you like to add something, comment something, throw something in the trash?
I see you spent a lot of time making the identity comparison work between enums, but on the other hand, you probably also use value objects in your code. I just treat them as value objects and have a separate method that compares if they are the same, or I take care to just use the two equal signs when comparing enums.
That's also fine. The idea was to, but do you have to manually construct them, or you have let's say a global way of accessing them? Do you have to manually?
Global way. I just extend the enum class and define the constants. It's a library. I think it's the first library on packages.
The one that you can define as well as null, -1, and similar.
Probably.
Yeah. As I said, there isn't anything wrong with it all. Also, if, for example, you are allowed, if it allows you to have type hints.
Yeah, it makes it easier to store it in a database if you have a value for your enum.
Well, This one implements, actually, my library has toString, which then uses the enum name as its value, because I had an idea of not orienting towards the value itself, because I only care about the enum's identity, what it means, what is enum. And for some complex logic, there can be a service that, depending on the enum, resolves the other value that I need. That's my reason. So someone else perhaps has the different.
Yeah, storage
So
in
it's good.
database is easier with integers.
Yeah, that is also true because some databases don't have enums, some databases have enums as strings, some have as constraints and similar. But I'm also not focused so much on the database because that's a whole other layer. And when I'm thinking about PHP itself, there is always some other layer that will transform our domain objects into the database itself. So as for this library, more shameless, I'm missing the word in English, marketing, promotion. I'm also working on Symfony form support for these enums and doctrines, so perhaps in about 1 week they could be all done. We'll see. Any other questions? I went too far. Ajde, Vila, vidim da želiš.
Ako neće niš pitati, gdje će doći do prije.
Yeah, so the main idea is not how you use enums, but not to use constants or integers. That would be the main takeaway, not to use my library or Eloquent or something else. Whatever works for you. The idea is just to show why type hinted enums could work better for you than integer or string, and something else can transform it then later into integer or string and so on.
Maybe a quick question about the planets example from Java.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be much better for value objects? Aren't enums the idea that they just have a single value like gender or active, and not have constants and values and everything else attached?
Yeah, that's enums are defined as someone wants, in a sense, what they can offer. Most canonical example is enums in C, where you just say enum and define a number of identifiers, and that's it. Then you can then assign them inside. Internally, they are represented as integers. I believe you can also do some arithmetic operations with them, but that's the most basic idea. It just so happens that if you make enums as objects, you can have a lot of other things, for example, different methods and so on. But whether you would like to define something as enum or not depends on your domain, perhaps. Because enums are sets of values that are known before the runtime. You define them. If it's something that's not changeable, I say that it makes sense to make them enumerations. They don't have to have any behavior like, return a gravitational constant, return their mass, and something else. But also they can. You can have a enum that represents a planet in our solar system, and it can return its own mass, its own gravitational constant, because these things are constant. They don't change. But you'd like to use enum as identifier throughout your code, not as its value. You can resolve value depending on its identifier later. That way you split domains between PHP and MySQL and other things. Perhaps I wasn't clear, but I think that's English me speaking.
So before beers and the drink part, let's give a round of applause to
Do you have something to say?
if you have any more questions, feel free to ask him or Ante. Here, I think that Pete has already came. We have some beers, cola, and everything else. I think we have about till 9, right? And
then,
oh, till 10.
Oh,
So
you can relax.
bon appetit and have a beer.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
А, подписывайся,